It's one of the most impossible stories in the entire history of aviation. Two women, two different continents, two catastrophic mid-air breakups, both falling from the sky without a parachute, and both surviving. This is the first of those stories. A story that begins on Christmas Eve, 1971, inside a turboprop aircraft cutting across the Peruvian skies, and ends deep in the Amazon rainforest, where a 17-year-old girl would fight for her life for 10 days, alone. Her name was Juliane Koepke, and what happened to her should have been fatal, but somehow it wasn't. Before we begin, get ready for a powerful story. Hit the like button, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Let's dive in. The flight. On the morning of December 24th, Lanza Flight 508 prepared for a routine hop across Peru. The aircraft was a Lockheed L-188 Electra, a rugged four-engine turboprop famous in South America and infamous for a troubled operational history depending on the airline. That day, the Electra carried 86 passengers and 6 crew members on a flight toward the city of Pucallpa in the Peruvian Amazon. Among the passengers were Maria Koepke, a respected German biologist living in Peru, and her daughter Juliane, who had just graduated secondary school the day before. Their destination was the Amazon Biology Research Center, where Juliane's father, Hans, was already working. The Andes crossing was calm, smooth even. No one suspected that minutes later they would fly into one of the deadliest storm systems imaginable. At the storm, as the aircraft descended toward the Amazon basin, the weather worsened quickly. In front of them towered an enormous cumulonimbus cloud, one of the most dangerous formations a pilot can encounter. Standard procedure is clear. You avoid it, you go around, you do not enter. But for reasons never fully understood, Lanza 508 continued straight ahead, directly into the heart of the storm. Within seconds, daylight vanished. The sky outside turned black. Lightning illuminated the cabin. The Electra shook violently as turbulence slammed the aircraft in all directions. Juliane would later describe the scene as being swallowed by darkness, with lightning exploding everywhere. Passengers screamed as luggage burst from the overhead compartments and shot across the aisle. The chaos grew worse by the second. The lightning strike. Then, one bright flash. A violent explosion shook the aircraft. Lightning is believed to have struck the right-wing fuel tank, igniting it. Fire engulfed the wing, spreading fast. Moments later, the wing tore away from the aircraft. At that altitude, 3,000 meters, the Electra instantly lost stability. Aerodynamic forces ripped the fuselage apart. The cabin split open. People were thrown into open sky, including Juliane. The fall. At just 17 years old, she was ejected from the aircraft, still strapped to a long row of seats, plummeting toward the jungle below. The fall should have been unsurvivable. But experts believe the row of seats acted like a crude aerodynamic brake, slowing her descent just enough to avoid a fatal terminal velocity. And below her lay the dense, layered canopy of the Amazon rainforest, a natural cushion, though brutal in impact. Juliane lost consciousness. When she woke up, it was Christmas morning. The survival begins. She was injured, a vertebra displaced, her tibia partially fractured. Deep cuts and abrasions across her body. She was alone, in the rainforest, with no supplies except a small bag of candies that had fallen beside her. But Juliane knew one thing: if she stayed in the same place, she would die. Her parents were both biologists, and she had grown up in the forest. They had taught her a critical survival rule: follow water, streams lead to rivers, rivers lead to people. So she began walking. The jungle. For days, Juliane pushed forward. The rainforest around her was both beautiful and deadly. Her wounds became infected. Her dizziness returned. Nights were freezing. Insects swarmed. Visibility was minimal beneath the canopy. On the 4th day, she stumbled upon a chilling sight. 3 passengers still strapped to their seats dead. One of the bodies was a woman. For a moment, Julianne feared it was her mother. But her mother never painted her nails. This woman had. She kept walking. Just 10 days. By the 10th day, Julianne could barely stand. But then, finally, she saw something man-made. A small boat tied to the riverbank, next to an empty logger's hut. Inside the cabin, she found diesel fuel. She used it to disinfect her wounds and remove the larvae that had begun feeding on her tissue. That night, she slept under a roof for the first time since the crash. The next morning, the loggers returned. Shocked to find a bruised and barely conscious teenage girl, they fed her, helped her into their boat, and took her downriver for 7 hours. From there, rescue crews carried her to Pucallpa, where she was reunited with her father. Julianne Koepke was the sole survivor of Lancer Flight 508. 91 others died. Her mother's body would only be found 19 days later. After the rescue, Julianne spent weeks in the hospital recovering. After she healed, her father took her back to Germany. She eventually became a biologist, just like her parents, and devoted her life to studying tropical animals. She continued returning to Peru decades after the accident. But trauma does not disappear easily. Her survival came with nightmares, depression, and a crushing survivor's guilt that followed her for years. Still, she lived and rebuilt her life. Her memoir, When I Fell from the Sky, was translated into many languages and shared worldwide, though never into Portuguese. Her survival remains one of the most extraordinary events in aviation history. A second fall, another impossible survival. Just 43 days after Julianne Koepke fell from the Amazon sky, another woman, in another part of the world, would experience the same nightmare. This time, the fall wouldn't be from 3,000 meters. It would be from 10,000 meters, the cruising altitude of a commercial jetliner. And once again, the person would survive. Her name was Vesna Vulovic, a 22-year-old flight attendant working for JAT Yugoslav Airlines. What happened to her remains the highest documented survival fall in aviation history. The flight, on January 26, 1972, JAT Flight 367 departed Stockholm, Sweden. The plane was a Douglas DC-9, making stops in Copenhagen, Zagreb, and finally Belgrade, capital of what was then Yugoslavia, a nation that today no longer exists. Among the passengers was Vesna, wearing her crisp flight attendant uniform, ready for another routine shift. But the region wasn't calm. Yugoslavia at the time was dealing with extremist attacks carried out by the Ustaše, a violent ultranationalist group responsible for bombings targeting the Yugoslav government. That tension would soon reach Flight 367. The bomb. In Stockholm, a man using a false passport checked a suitcase onto the plane. Inside it was a bomb. He boarded the aircraft with a ticket to Belgrade, but disembarked in Copenhagen during the connection. No one suspected anything. A second bomb, set by the same extremist faction, also exploded that day, on a train traveling from Vienna to Zagreb. That bomb injured 6 people. The one aboard Flight 367 would be far deadlier. 46 minutes after takeoff, the DC-9 climbed to cruising altitude, 10,000 meters, over the cold winter landscape of Czechoslovakia. Then, without warning, an explosion ripped the aircraft apart. The cabin decompressed instantly. The fuselage shattered into 3 major sections. Passengers and crew were thrown into the frozen air. Vesna, who had been pushing a service cart moments before, was violently slammed against the rear galley wall as the cart pinned her body into place. It was brutal, but that impact, ironically, would be the reason she lived. Duck the fall. Still trapped inside a chunk of fuselage, Vesna plummeted toward the ground. The debris rotated, tumbled, and slowed in the air, acting like a giant, uneven parachute, just as Julianne's row of seats had done. Below, the region was deep in midwinter. Snow blanketed the hills in thick, soft layers. The fuselage hit the slope hard. Against all odds, Vesna survived. The rescuer. A local man, a former World War II medic, heard the crash. He struggled through the snow to find survivors. When he found Vesna, she was barely conscious, her uniform shredded, her body covered in blood. She was alive, but barely. Doctors later discovered both legs broken, pelvis fractured, several ribs shattered, 3 vertebrae crushed, severe internal injuries. One vertebra had been so damaged that doctors were certain she would never walk again. And yet, she was alive. 27 days in a coma, Vesna was rushed to a hospital in Prague, where she spent nearly a month in a coma. She woke up only briefly at times, disoriented, asking why her parents weren't there, because she remembered nothing after greeting passengers in Copenhagen. Eventually, she fully regained consciousness, with her parents at her bedside. When doctors showed her a newspaper describing the crash, she fainted. The transfer to Belgrade. After stabilizing, Vesna was flown by air ambulance to Belgrade for long-term treatment. Doctors offered her sedatives so she wouldn't panic during the flight, considering the trauma she had been through. But she refused. She said she wasn't afraid of flying, because she didn't remember the accident at all. Months of recovery. Vesna remained hospitalized for more than 3 months. She endured multiple surgeries. She slowly regained mobility, first in one leg, then the other. Her spine stayed slightly crooked, and she walked with a limp for the rest of her life. But she could walk, and that was a miracle no doctor could explain. Sudden celebrity. After being discharged, Vesna returned to work at JAT, not as a flight attendant, but in an office role. The airline feared that if she flew again, her presence would draw crowds of curious passengers. She became a national symbol in Yugoslavia, a living miracle, a hero. Marshal Tito himself, the nation's leader, awarded her with honors. Songs were written about her. Her story spread across Eastern Europe. The Czech town near the crash site made her an honorary citizen. A newborn girl, granddaughter of the farmer who rescued Vesna, was named in her honor, but fame isn't always a blessing. Private tragedy. Shortly after leaving the hospital, Vesna suffered a devastating personal loss. Her parents, who had cared for her tirelessly, died within days of each other. Years later she married, but an ectopic pregnancy nearly killed her. She never had children. In 1985, the Guinness Book of Records recognized her as the human who survived the highest fall without a parachute. She received the honor directly from Paul McCartney. It should have been a highlight of her life, but darker years were coming. UX, the 1990s, loss and politics. When Yugoslavia collapsed in a bloody civil war, Vesna stayed in Serbia, now ruled by strongman Slobodan Milosevic. She opposed the government and lost her job. To silence her, state-controlled newspapers launched attacks against her. They spread conspiracy theories. Some even questioned whether she had survived the fall at all. Afraid of government retaliation, many of her friends distanced themselves. The survivor of the highest fall in history fell into deep depression, made heavier by the survivor's guilt she'd felt for decades. The final years. In 2000, after Milosevic was removed from power, Vesna supported a democratic political movement, though she never ran for office. Her health declined with age. Her fame faded, but her tragedy and her resilience stayed with her. In December 2016, friends became worried. She wasn't answering the phone. They broke into her apartment and found Vesna dead at age 66, likely from a heart attack, alone, quiet, far from the worldwide attention she once received. The parallel: 2 women, 2 airplanes torn apart in mid-air, 2 impossible falls from the sky, one landing in the Amazon jungle, one landing on a snowy European hillside, both suffering the same emotional wound, the guilt of surviving when no one else did. Their stories are separated by distance, by culture, and by fate, but linked forever by the rarest of human experiences, falling from the sky and living to tell the story. Closing sequence: 2 women, 1 impossible fate. In aviation, survival is usually measured in minutes, in oxygen masks, emergency procedures, and odds that almost never favor the passengers. But what Julian Koepke and Vesna Vulovic survived cannot be calculated. No checklist accounts for it. No simulator can reproduce it. They lived through the kind of event that leaves investigators speechless, a fall from the sky without a parachute, at altitudes where survival simply should not be possible. And yet, there they were. Two ordinary women thrust into extraordinary circumstances. The parallel of survival. Julian fell into the world's largest rainforest, a labyrinth of life and danger, where countless explorers have vanished forever. Vesna fell into the frozen silence of a European winter, a landscape of cold, shock, and isolation, separated by continents, separated by culture, and yet connected by a terrifying symmetry, a mid-air explosion, a catastrophic breakup, a plunge from thousands of meters, a landing softened only by nature itself, and a recovery shaped by human resilience and human suffering. Their survival wasn't clean, it wasn't magical, it wasn't painless, it was brutal. It left scars, physical and emotional, that lasted their entire lives. The weight of survival. People often imagine surviving a plane crash as a miracle, but for the survivors, it becomes a lifelong negotiation with memory. Julian fought nightmares for decades, carrying the loss of her mother through every achievement. Vesna fought depression and political persecution, living under a spotlight she never asked for. Both carried the same burden, survivor's guilt, the psychological shadow that asks, why me? Why did I live when everyone else didn't? There is no easy answer. Maybe there never will be. Legacy. Julian rebuilt her life through science, studying the same forests that nearly claimed her. Vesna lived through her fame, her trauma, and the collapse of her country. Her courage tested far beyond the fall itself. Both became symbols not of tragedy but of endurance. They remind us that the human body is fragile and the human spirit incomprehensibly strong. Final reflection. Documentary ending. Two women fell from the sky, one into the arms of the jungle, one into the cold silence of winter. Neither should have lived. Both did. Not because of luck alone, but because against everything nature and physics predicted, their stories weren't finished yet. And maybe that's the quiet lesson hidden inside these two impossible survivals. Sometimes the sky takes everything, and sometimes it gives someone back.